KKHT wants you to meet three of the classiest guys in real estate.
I am Chris Kelso, the maestro of mortgage.
I am Rob Cook, the godfather of real estate.
And I'm Joe Orsak, the king of credit swing. And together, we're
the Real Estate Rat Pack.
Much like us, real estate right now is smoking hot. So whether it's buying, selling, or owning, you need to check out the Real Estate Rat Pack.
They're here to take your calls and answer your questions live. Call now 1-800-808-5548. And now, the Real Estate Rat Pack!
Hey, we already did it up this morning.
I know.
That was actually a good. I think we gotta start going with that from now on.
That was pretty good.
That was really good. We start off with the and then you go the who.
Build up. Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
every week when I watch the audio back, that section always cracks me up because it's this big, massive spike of sound. I always know where the where the howl is at.
You know, and speaking of howling, we're going to be howling out to Rob Cook, who's not in the studio today. He's actually having a good time.
Little time in
TAR.
county.
That is correct. He's doing a little time in county out there called San Antonio.
Yes.
Or what they call TAR for the Texas Association of Realtors, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So, Rob, big shout out to you there.
He's getting his tar on.
That is correct. It's always important to get your tar on. So, but we're going to miss him here in the studio today. And, one of the things that we're doing for all those listening is we're going to be talking today, believe it or not, about credit and mortgage. That is the entire subject matter today. We also might have somebody stopping by, give us some of those hand-rolled cigars later on today.
I think that's a possibility.
That's a possibility right there. And I love your shirt, by the way.
Thank you. It's
a great shirt. It actually was provided by Lucho's.
Lucho in the Galleria.
And that is always good stuff right there. But you can reach us at 800-808-5548. That's 800-808-5548. And again, we're speaking all about credit and mortgage. And one of the things I want to start off with is from a credit standpoint. One of the things that we talk about all the time, Joe, how is credit established and what consists of developing a credit score?
Well, it involves some magical beans and coconut oil, the right temperature. Oh, I'm kidding.
And the coconut oil, exactly.
Well, building positive credit, building a good credit score, there's actually 5 areas that really are the large areas that break down into many, many, many specific details after that I won't bore everybody to tears with. But the process of building a good credit score is broken down into 5 categories. Kind of a shocker for most people that if you think, what determines my credit score? How is my credit score created? Most people
it's just not an algorithm they put out there, and then, you have to go pray to a certain, credit.
It's about that way. It's about that way. The formula that they use to determine a credit score is probably more secretive than the Coke formula.
Right.
Nobody knows. Even within the organization itself, there's different teams that work on, they're called scorecards or cards, where their set of algorithms are determined. So that team only knows their set of algorithms, and there's 18 cards. And 18 different teams. So
right.
It's highly, highly secretive, which, if you think about, does make sense. They don't want anybody manipulating their behavior to take advantage of the score to increase the score falsely.
Right.
The score is supposed to be just an indicator of risk. That's all it is. So when a lender or a creditor is considering extending money to you, they look at those 3 little scores, and they are able to, from those scores, determine how much risk you represent in loaning money.
Correct.
So that's kind of the overall, big idea. The thing that kind of would throw people, if you ask the average person walking the street, what do you think the number one factor is that determines your credit score? It's not rocket science. Most people get it, right?
Right.
How you pay your bills.
Yep.
That's not a big shocker. Pay your bills on time. You've got the number one category covered. But the thing that does shock a lot of people is when you ask them what percentage of their score is determined by paying their bills on time. You would think, and I usually get when I teach classes, I get answers all the time, 50%, 60%, and logically in your mind that would make sense.
Right.
You would think that, hey, how I pay my bills is going to be the biggest indicator of what creates my credit score. But the shocker is that only 35% of your score comes from how you pay your bills.
And it's still the largest portion.
It's
but
the largest
portion. But when you have 6 factors to consider really in making up a credit score, 6 key factors or 5 key factors in making up your credit score, it's a large percentage. But really, in the overall aspect of things, people sit there and go, I pay my bills on time.
Yes, exactly.
Isn't that what the measure is supposed to be of?
Exactly. And so when you say only 35%, to kind of drive the point home, I say that means that there is 65% of your score that's being determined by something other than how you pay your bills.
Right.
And if you don't know what those other factors are, you have exposed yourself to 65% risk.
Right. And some of those factors being, for example, the amount of credit you're using.
Correct.
So you can be paying your bill absolutely on time. But if you have it maxed out, for lack of a better word, if you have it, to the limit of what your available credit limit is, that's a factor associated with a lower credit score.
That's a huge factor. In fact, that's the second category, which is, for me, as the biggest shocker when you add, teaching this class and teaching this kind of material. We get to this one, we say the second factor, and sometimes people are savvy enough about their credit that they will guess that, it's, hey, the amount of debt that I carry is probably the next, indicator of my credit score. That is the second category. The part that's shocking is that 30% of your score comes from the amount of debt you carry on your credit cards.
Wow.
30, that's only 5% less than how you pay your bills.
Right. So you have 65% of your credit now determined by 2 factors. Number 1, how you pay your bills, your timeliness of pay. And then number 2 is how much of your credit you're using in proportion to what's available to you.
Specifically that revolving credit.
Right.
The credit card debt, that's what it's looking at, credit card debt. So it scores a home loan or an auto loan, installment loans differently than credit debt, revolving credit debt.
And then how about, the third thing, and I don't know if it's the third thing, I know it's one of the things that we always look at from a mortgage side thing is establishing length of history of credit.
That is the third category.
There you go.
You're on track here.
I don't, that's crazy, everything I've gone through so far. But yeah, so the next one is the length of history then.
That's correct. 15% of your score comes from the length of credit history that you have, which here's the kind of a fun thing that we get into when we talked about building credit a second. I think we should, for the listeners, that's an issue for a lot of people is how do I establish credit and get started? If I don't have good credit to begin with or no credit, I get turned down for credit cards. So how do I even begin to build credit? So we'll kind of touch on that in a second. But ideally, minimum 2 credit cards, 3 to 5 is the ideal range.
Right.
You don't want to have more than 5. Well, I run into those folks who say, but Joe, between my wife and I, we have probably 20 credit cards.
Right.
And they have that wallet that folds out and it's, it drops down to the floor, It's
like the fan.
Yes, exactly. And they've got the Lowe's card and the Home Depot card and the Best Buy card and the, Visa and the MasterCard and the American Express and all these different cards. They're like, well, should I cancel some of these cards? And the answer is always, it depends.
Right.
Because here's what happens is that, first of all, if you are needing your credit score now immediately and it's already in a range where you need it to be, then don't go messing with it.
Right.
Right. Because when you cancel those cards, third category, that history, you start cutting off that history.
Right.
You start losing history. So in the initial, you will take a hit in closing those accounts.
Right.
Right. But over time, you will come back to a higher place. And again, it's all about risk if you think about this. And I got into a debate with another credit expert one time on LinkedIn. And I said that you can have too many positive credit lines.
Correct.
And he just went off on me. He was like, that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You can't have too many, good trade lines, all this kind of stuff. And so it wasn't even like 3 days later, I had a credit report come across my desk, and the number one derogatory statement on the credit report was too many positive trade lines. It literally said that. There's a code for it and everything. So I screenshotted it and sent it to him and said, there you go. But Mr. Credit Expert. Anyway, you can have too many positive credit lines. You're like, well, I don't even use them, Joe. I have them in the drawer. It's for a rainy day in case of emergency and that type of thing. But you have to think about it from the lender standpoint. You have 10 credit cards with $10,000, open to buy on each one. You represent $100,000 potential in debt.
That is correct.
So if there's some life crisis, you're a drinking binge away from hitting Vegas and ended up in Mexico with a Ferrari that you didn't know you bought.
Right.
All on the credit cards, whatever. That's a larger possibility of risk than the person who only has 2 cards with $5,000 worth of limit on them.
Right.
So it's a smaller risk. So you can have too many positive trade lines.
And we promise not to talk about my personal life about that. By the way.
Yeah. So
I thought that was privacy policy.
Yes. So that's the third category, the length of credit history. So if you're that person that has the 20 credit cards, what do you do? How do you approach that? I always tell folks there's a couple different ways to approach it. It's the slow dribble over time of damage, or the rip the Band-Aid all off at once approach.
Right.
If you don't want to take a huge hit on your scores, you cancel one every few months until you get down to that 3 to 5 card range and stick with that. Major credit cards, avoid the department store cards like crazy. Not to offend, all the Macy's and Lowe's and Home Depots out there in the world, but there's a bunch of reasons behind that statement. Just stick with a good Visa, MasterCard type credit card, and you'll know that those all report to all 3 of the major credit bureaus.
Right.
And you keep the ones with the best length of history, with the longest positive payment history.
Right.
That's what you want to stick with. If you do that, the third category, 15% of your score, you'll have that nailed down.
So you've got 80% tied up in 3 main things right there.
Mm-hmm.
The next 2, what are the next 2?
Next 2 is a mix of credit.
Okay.
10% of your score comes from having 2 different types of credit.
Okay.
Installment,
like an installment
credit,
loan, a revolving
right,
loan,
exactly.
et cetera.
So if you have 2 credit cards and a car payment or a house payment, you're covered.
Okay.
Mix. A good mix of credit. They want to see that you're paying on those type of credit lines positively. That gives them a good variation to examine how you pay your bills.
And for a lot of our listeners, the biggest differential, what we see here in the mortgage industry and the credit industry, is what they called secured versus unsecured debt, right? So an installment loan, generally speaking, is a secured debt. What you go out and you buy a vehicle, you go out there and buy a home, you go out there and buy something that has a fixed amount of installments for a certain period of time. Whereas an unsecured debt is something like a credit card, where you have the ability to go out there, but it's not necessarily anything that's secured by anything.
Exactly. So there's some big names in the Christian media that talk about debt and credit and all this sort of thing, and there's various folks who are proponents of cutting up the credit cards and getting rid of the credit cards and unplugging from the credit system.
Right, and you can't do that.
And I would love to have the conversation about stewardship,
right,
and what it means to be a good steward of finances and not using credit.
Right.
Because in America, I think it's very, very difficult to actually be a good steward of your finances and be unplugged from the credit system.
Well, one of the things I'm going to say is we're going to come up against a break here in a few moments. But, I agree with you. I think you cannot be a good steward of finance and be unplugged from the system. Because if you go and try to get an automobile loan or a mortgage or go to Star Furniture or Gallery Furniture or any one of those companies and try to get the best available rate, terms,
exactly,
extended financing, et cetera, you won't get them.
And not only that, but and I know we're coming up against a break here, but it impacts you in areas that you don't even see.
Right.
How much you pay on your auto insurance. Right.
Yep.
Insurance folks will tell you that your insurance isn't connected to your credit score, and that's bogus. It's completely bogus. It's one layer removed. They use a system that gives you a letter grade, A through Z.
Right.
And that letter grade in their system is completely tied to your credit score.
That is correct.
Right. So if you come back as an M in their system, you're like, whoa, you're paying a lot more on your insurance.
Yep.
Right. So it hits you in areas like that. But now, more than ever, it also impacts you in your career.
Right.
I know more and more companies that won't hire without checking credit, won't promote into management without checking credit, all sorts of things. And it's kind of starting to work its way through court systems about how much, we like that. But it's a fact. It is what it is right now.
It's a fact of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We are coming up against a break right now, but anyone who wants to listen to us or ask a question about credit or mortgage, call us at 800-808-5548. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
I won't dance. Don't ask me. I won't dance, madam, with you. My heart won't let my feet do things that they should do. You know